On the last day of May, 1889, after the heaviest rain anyone in the valley could remember, an earthen dam high in the mountains of Pennsylvania began to give way. Behind it sat a private lake, 20 million tons of water, the playground of some of the richest men in America. 14 miles down a narrow valley below it sat the steel town of Johnstown and 15,000 ordinary people. When the dam broke, they had almost no warning. In less than an hour, 2,200 of them would be dead. Sinister business, bankrupt empire. The dam was not new. It had been built decades earlier by the state of Pennsylvania as part of a canal system, then abandoned when the railroads made the canals obsolete. For years it sat neglected, the reservoir behind it slowly draining through leaks. Then, in 1879, it was bought by a group of wealthy men from Pittsburgh, 60 miles to the west. They had a vision. They would dam the lake back up, stock it with fish, and build a private summer resort in the clean mountain air, far above the smoke of the steel city that had made their fortunes. They called themselves the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club. The membership list read like a directory of the Gilded Age: Andrew Carnegie, the richest steelmaker in the world; Henry Clay Frick, his ruthless lieutenant; Andrew Mellon, the banker who would one day run the United States Treasury; some 60 industrialists and financiers in all, the men who owned Pittsburgh's mills, mines, and banks. They built cottages and a grand clubhouse along the shore of their restored lake, and to restore it, they had cut some corners. To save money, the club had repaired the dam cheaply, with mud, straw, and whatever was at hand, rather than a proper engineered core. They had lowered the top of the dam by several feet to widen it into a road for their carriages, which meant the lake could rise closer to the crest. They removed the dam's discharge pipes, the very mechanism that would have let them lower the water in an emergency, and sold them for scrap. And across the spillway, the dam's only emergency overflow, they installed screens of iron mesh to stop their expensive stocked fish from escaping downstream. Engineers had warned them. Daniel Morrell, who ran the ironworks down in Johnstown, inspected the dam and sent the club detailed letters warning it was unsafe and could fail catastrophically. He even offered to pay for proper repairs. The club brushed him off. The dam, they assured everyone, was perfectly sound. For a decade, the people of Johnstown lived below 20 million tons of water held back by mud and straw, and learned to make nervous jokes about the lake in the sky. Then came the rain. On May 30th, 1889, a powerful storm stalled over the mountains and dropped as much as 10 inches of rain in a single day. The streams swelled. The lake rose fast. By the morning of May 31st, the water was nearing the top of the lowered dam, and the clogged fish screens were holding back a mat of debris that choked the spillway. The club's engineer and a crew of workers desperately tried to dig a new channel and raise the dam's height with mud, even as the water climbed toward the crest. It was not enough. At about 3:10 in the afternoon, the center of the dam simply dissolved. An entire lake surged into the valley at once, emptying in under 40 minutes. The wall of water rolling toward Johnstown was, in places, 36 feet high and moving at 40 miles an hour. And it was not just water. It was a churning mass of whole trees, boulders, houses, locomotives, and miles of barbed wire torn loose from a wireworks in its path. Smaller villages above the town were obliterated first, with almost no survivors. When the flood reached Johnstown, it struck without warning on a normal working afternoon. Entire streets of houses were lifted off their foundations and ground to splinters. People were swept away in an instant. Whole families vanished. Then the water surged through the town and slammed into a great stone railroad bridge at the lower end of the valley. The stone bridge held, and that became its own horror. All the debris the flood had gathered, the houses, the trees, and the people trapped within it, piled up against the bridge in a tangled mountain, acres wide and 30 feet high. Survivors were caught in it, pinned but alive. And then the debris pile, soaked in oil and tangled with stoves and lamps, caught fire. 80 people who had survived the flood itself burned to death against the bridge, within sight of rescuers who could not reach them. When the water finally fell, Johnstown was gone. 2,209 people were dead, including 99 entire families and almost 400 children. 1 in 3 bodies was never identified, buried in a field of unmarked graves. It was, at that moment, the deadliest single day in American civilian history. The Young American Red Cross, led by Clara Barton, arrived to run its first great peacetime relief operation. The nation's grief turned to fury at the club. Newspapers laid out the lowered crest, the missing discharge pipes, the fish screens, the cheap repairs, the ignored warnings. The survivors sued. And here the story turns from tragedy to something colder. In court, the club argued that the flood was an act of God, an unforeseeable catastrophe for which no person could be blamed. The Pennsylvania courts agreed. The club was found not liable. Not one member ever paid a single dollar to a single victim. The members of the club were among the wealthiest men in the world. Andrew Carnegie alone was worth, in today's money, hundreds of billions of dollars. Their total contribution to the relief of the town they had drowned amounted to a handful of private donations. Carnegie, years later, built Johnstown a library. Some in the town saw the gift for what it partly was, a monument paid for by a man whose club had killed their families and never answered for it. The Johnstown flood helped change American law. It drove the rise of a principle called strict liability. The idea that if you create an abnormally dangerous thing, a lake in the sky held by a mud dam, you are responsible for the harm it does whether you were careless or not. The men of South Fork escaped that principle by a few years. The people who came after them would not. Today, the broken dam still stands, or rather, the gap in it does. You can walk to the spot where the center gave way and look down the valley the water took. The National Park Service runs it as a memorial. The lake is gone. The clubhouse remains. And the lesson sits there in the quiet mountain air, as plain as it was in 1889. The people who enjoyed the lake lived above the danger. The people who paid for it lived below. Johnstown rebuilt. But it is the flood of 1889 that the town remembers. The one that did not have to happen, the one held back for 10 years by mud and straw and the confidence of men who were never going to be standing below the dam when it failed. Bankrupt empire, sinister business, the dark side of business. Subscribe.